You guys, today we're going to be going over every single book we've read so far in 2024. We did this video last year and had such a fun time reflecting back on everything we read the first half of the year, so we're going to do it again today.
We've each read about 64 books, so we have them all here on the cart, so we're going to go over each and every book and tell you if we think they're worth it or not.
We do have the books in the order of which we read them, so we're just going to quickly go over each one, keep it short and sweet. This time last year we had only read about 45 books each, so there was a huge increase in what we were able to read, and we have Magic Mind to thank for that. You guys know we've been on our Magic Mind journey. Magic Mind are these little productivity shots that help boost energy and focus. Their goal is to make the best beverage on the planet for creators, and they promise to do it the right way for everyone involved, even if that means going above and beyond industry standards.
They promise to only use the world's best suppliers to require rigorous testing of every ingredient they use. They also readily provide certificates of analysis for their ingredients to anyone who requests it.
If you try it and decide you don't like it, they also have a 100% back money guarantee refund, no questions asked, and you can keep the bottles.
If you are interested, we do have a discount code, LorandaReads20, and you can use that to get 20% off your order. So we will leave that linked in the description. But you guys know how much we love Magic Mind, so thank you again, Magic Mind, for sponsoring today's video.
Now to get into the books, the very first book I read this year was Crying in H Mart by Michelle Zauner. This is her memoir about growing up Asian American and losing her mother to cancer. I was not expecting it to be as sad as it was. It was super raw and heartbreaking. Definitely read content warnings if you need to, but it is worth the read if you're interested in learning more about this author.
The first book I read in 2024 was Bad Blood by Jennifer Lynn Barnes, so I did finish the entire Natural series. I think by the time I got to this book, the plot did slow down a little bit, and I was just really sticking around for the characters. This definitely has one of my most favorite found families, and I did enjoy this series a lot more than The Inheritance Game, so I do recommend this series.
I read a couple different memoirs at the start of the year, so the next one I read is Lauren Graham's Talking as Fast as I Can. This was a really short memoir about her experience going back on the set of Gilmore Girls and what it was like when she started her acting career. If you are a fan of the show, worth the read. It feels like Lorelai is just venting about her life. I highly recommend the audiobook if you decide to read this one, but they also have like cool behind the scenes pictures and stuff included as well.
The next one I have is my first 5-star read of 2024, and that is The Toll by Neil Shusterman. No surprise here, this series was absolutely amazing. I am excited for Gleanings, which is basically just short stories of different things going on in this universe, and that's exactly what I want. I am really sad that this specific plotline is done, but I am excited about reading different stories in this universe. This book was so good though, I can't imagine a more perfect way for it to end, and I will forever highly recommend this series.
Last memoir I have is Beyond the Wand by Tom Felton. I really enjoyed this memoir because he talks about what it was like auditioning for the Harry Potter series, and he talks about what it was like on set. He also touches on growing up and his childhood with 4 older brothers. If you enjoyed the movies, pick this up. It really made me love Tom Felton much more.
The next one I have is Set on You by Amy Lee. This one is really interesting because our main girly is a social media curvy influencer, and I really did enjoy reading that side of the story. But as for the romance, I have to be so honest, I don't remember anything about the romance. I think the guy was like a firefighter or something. This book definitely wasn't my favorite in the series. I did end up reading the second one later on, so we'll get into that one. But as for this one, I don't recommend.
The first fiction book I read of the year ended up being 5 stars, and it was The Unmaking of June Farrow by Adrienne Young. You guys know we love this author. This book had it all. It has a little bit of a mystery, there's romance, magical realism. If you don't know anything about it, I would go into it blind, but I did absolutely love it. Worth the read, especially if you love her writing already.
The next one I have is The One by Kira Cass, and I actually did end up finishing the entire Selection series and the spin-off series to the Selection. When I read this one though, I didn't realize that this was the end of the overall series and the other books were going to be spin-offs, so I wasn't emotionally or mentally prepared to say goodbye to these characters. But the series is very good. It's like the Hunger Games and The Bachelor mixed in one, so it's a lot of fun. It is worth the read even if you don't like YA.
The next book I read is The Stranger Upstairs by Lisa M. Maitland. This was a mystery thriller about an influencer and her husband who move into this home in hopes to renovate it. This house is known as the murder house though, and spooky things start happening. I will say this is not my favorite mystery thriller that I've read this year, but it is a quick enough read, so worth it if you need to reach your Goodreads goal, but I don't know that I'd read it again.
The next one I have is Iron Flame by Rebecca Yarros. This came out last year, so I'm surprised that I read it this year. I loved Fourth Wing so much that you would have just thought I would have read this as soon as it came out. I do remember that I didn't connect as much as I wanted to with this book. I felt like things were a little bit repetitive until we got to the very end, then things went crazy. But I feel like I'm too invested to these characters to stop reading this series, so I'm sure I'm going to read the next book when it comes out. If you liked Fourth Wing, then read the next book. If not, let's just stop there.
The next book I have is Almond Kind by Won Pyong-sun. This was a 5-star read for me. In this book, we're following a boy who has a brain condition that doesn't allow him to feel emotions the way we do. It is such a short read, but it's so impactful. I still think about this story to this day. 100% worth the read. This is one of the ones that made me fall in love with like literary fiction.
The next one I have is Pretty Little Wife by Darby Kane. I don't even remember this book, so nothing stood out because I can't even tell you what happened here. So I'm gonna say I don't recommend.
The next book we actually both read this year. It was one of our book club picks, and this is Ruthless Vows by Rebecca Ross. This is the sequel to Divine Rivals, which we already didn't love. We wanted to give the sequel a shot. Again, it wasn't our favorite, but I do remember really appreciating her writing and the descriptions. But I remember wishing that I had stopped at book 1.
And I remember feeling the exact same way.
So is it worth the read? Depending on whether or not you liked book 1.
Up next, I have Highly Suspicious and Unfairly Cute by Talia Hibberts. This one is such a cute YA romance, and it is a really fast read as well. This is one of those where there is a lot of back and forth, young, silly drama, and a little too much miscommunication, but I know I would have liked it a lot more if I had read it when I was younger. Definitely a cute, solid, fast YA romance.
Next book I have is Notes on an Execution by Danya Kakofka. This was an insane book. We have a man who is on death row, and we are learning about his life through the POV of 3 women he knew throughout his life. This didn't go as I expected, but it was a very unique, interesting read. So I'm gonna say worth it if you're interested in this type of subject matter.
Up next, I have Caught Up by Liz Tomford. I love Liz Tomford. I love everything she writes. This one is definitely my favorite of her books this far. We're following a baseball player, and we're following his coach's daughter who ends up babysitting his kids, so it's so cute. I find myself getting more and more excited with each couple that we get in this series. I know her most recent book just came out, so I have to read it sometime soon, but I gave this a 4.75, which is basically a 5-star read, so definitely recommend.
Another memoir I read this year was Carmen Maria Machado's In the Dream House. I had heard such amazing things about this book, and everything people are saying is true. This was a memoir about her experience in an abusive relationship with an ex-girlfriend, but the way that she went about writing this is absolutely insane. Her storytelling is unmatched. She basically wrote each chapter in a different genre, and each one had a different writing style. It was just unlike anything I've ever read. Worth the read if you're looking for something like that. Super, super unique, and I can't wait to read more by this author.
Up next, we have Powerless by Lauren Roberts. We both read this book. I think we both enjoyed it. Did you like it?
I did.
Okay, I remember loving it. I know a lot of people have a lot of hate on this book because it reminds them of a lot of different things, which I do understand that, but as somebody who hasn't read a lot of fantasy, I really connected with this book and I liked it a lot. So I'm excited to read book 2, but I have to wait for that paperback to come out.
The next book I read is Starling House by Alexi Haro. In this book, there's a woman who was rumored to have murdered her husband and used his money to build Starling House. So when Opal accepts a job housekeeping at Starling House, a bunch of secrets start unraveling. This honestly got a lot darker than I was expecting, and I liked that. I'd say this is worth the read if you're looking for a short, spooky book, but it was nothing that I could have predicted, which I like.
Alright, the next one I have is X's and O's by Amy Lee. So I told you I didn't like Set on You, which was the first book in the Influencer series, so I wasn't expecting much from this book, but I actually loved it. And I think I liked it even more because I wasn't expecting to love it so much. The back sums it up well. This says a romance novel-obsessed social media influencer revisits her exes on her hunt for true love in this romantic comedy. So good. There's so many Bachelor and Taylor Swift references in there. It's like the perfect Valentine's read.
The next book I have is Two Twisted Crowns by Rachel Gillig. This was the sequel to One Dark Window. Such a good duet. I honestly could have read a whole series in this world. There's a mysterious illness, there's a quest, they have unique magic systems, there's a little bit of a romance. I absolutely loved it. This definitely deserves a hype. If you haven't read it yet, I'd say it's worth it. This was one of the rare times where I was reading it and it didn't remind me of anything I've ever read.
The next one I have is Love Redesigned by Lauren Asher. All of the book girlies were eating this book up, so I really wanted to love it just as much as them, but I just did not. And I think this book has it's made me realize that I don't like second chance romance books, and I need to just accept that and stop trying to read books like that because they always fall flat for me. I know the second book in this series does have a trope that I do tend to like, so I might continue on with the series. We'll see.
Next book I have is No One Can Know by Kate Alice Marshall. I have grown to love this author. In the story, we have 3 estranged sisters who are brought back together and start to question what really happened the night that their parents were murdered. This was honestly just such a fun story to try and figure out. Even if you do put the pieces together, it's still interesting waiting for our characters to find everything out. This book really solidified the fact though that if she comes out with any more mystery thrillers, I will be reading them.
Next is Wildfire by Hannah Grace. The first book was Icebreaker, so I knew I had to continue on with this series. This one was really cute too because our two main people are camp counselors, so I thought the idea of that was really fun. The romance was cute, but I did think it started to get a little bit repetitive. I was so glad we got to see so many characters from Icebreaker, and I'm excited for that third book.
Next book I have is Rouge by Mona Awad. I love this book. I think about it constantly. Kind of want to go back and give it a 5-star because I don't think I did. But this was a horror-tinged gothic fairy tale about a woman whose mother's unexpected death sends her down a path in pursuit of youth and beauty. Honestly, one of my favorite books of the year. It's so unsettling. Mona Awad just knows how to write creepy, fever dream-like books. Super bizarre, but super worth it. If you love Mona Awad, pick this book up. If you've never read anything by her, pick it up anyway, but just be ready because it's gonna get crazy.
Next we have Butcher and Blackbird by Bren Weaver. This was actually a book club book. I did like it. I thought the plot was so unique and interesting. It's a romance between two serial killers who are killing other serial killers. So the plot alone was so much fun. I just remember I wasn't expecting the time jumps that we kept getting, and I didn't really love that. But it was so much fun reading everyone's thoughts and opinions in the book club chats.
It's one of those that has super interesting premise, but I didn't love the execution. How do you lack depth and you're supposed to be serial killers? I was interested enough to read the second book, Leather and Lark, and I'll say I liked this one a little bit more, but not enough to continue the series. The same issues I had with book one, I had with this one, but I will say I love the covers.
The next one I have is The Wedding Date by Jasmine Guillory. This was a really cute and fast-paced rom-com. I loved all of the different representations in this book. I remember being shocked that the wedding happened so fast. I thought it was going to be like towards the end of the book. It was still a solid read, and I am interested in reading more books from Jasmine Guillory.
Next, I read one of my most anticipated books of the entire year, and it was Jade City by Fonda Lee. And I don't think it was for me, and that's okay. In this world, Jade gives its users these crazy magical abilities. It's basically the lifeblood of this world. And we watch these 4 siblings battle rival clans for honor and power. I loved the beginning of it. I think it kind of just dragged on. I wasn't interested until halfway through the book, and I don't think it needed to take that long for me to really get hooked. I don't know what about it. I just wasn't able to immerse myself in the story. Immediately after finishing it, I didn't feel the need to continue on with the series, but I do have the next book, so maybe in the future I'll revisit this world. Whether or not I think this book is worth it, I'm gonna say yes because so many people love this series, so I'd say give it a read and see how you feel.
Next I have Saint by Adrian Young. This was the prequel to the Fable duet, and Saint is Fable's dad, and we get to see him in the Fable books, and he's not our favorite character, but I loved getting his own book and really understanding why he is the way he is. Adrian Young, I'm always super immersed in her stories, and I could read so many stories in this universe, so I really hope she continues on with it. But I am excited to read some of her other books now.
Next book I read was Past Perfect Life by Elizabeth Eulberg. This was a YA story, and basically our main character finds out she's been lied to her whole life and she's not actually who her parents said she was. I was very interested in this book. I thought it was going to be like a hidden gem. I honestly didn't love it. It's less of a mystery and more about how she's adjusting to her new life. I just feel like I've read better YA contemporaries this year, so I don't think this one was worth the read. I did really like the idea of it though.
The next one I have is The Love of My Life by Rosie Walsh. I have to be so honest, I don't remember a single thing about this book, which is crazy because on my Goodreads review I gave it a 3.5 stars and it seemed like I liked it, and I was excited about the adaptation that's coming out with Amy Adams, but I might have to revisit that book before the adaptation comes out because I can't tell you what this book is even about.
Next book I read is A Short Stay in Hell by Stephen L. Peck. This is a super short story about a man who has just passed away, and he is sent to a hell unlike anything that we could have ever expected. It's a vast library, and you have to find the book that contains the story of your life in order to get out. This definitely reads like a short story. I would have liked a longer book. I would have loved to explore other people's stories in this world. I think it's worth the read though because it is so short, and I still do think about things that happen in this book.
The next one I have is The Coworker by Frida McFadden. This is honestly my least favorite Frida McFadden book, but I did think the plot was still entertaining. I just didn't like any of the characters, and I did think the twist was a little bit predictable. I swear I like reading. It just seems like I hate every single book. I don't. I guess I'm just realizing more things that I don't like. in books since we read so much. So whenever there's not a likable character, I can't. I have to like somebody in the book at least. I also remember there was so much talk about turtles in this book, and I never wanted to read the word turtle ever again. But I would not recommend this Freida McFadden book.
Next book I read was Where's Molly by H.D. Carlton. This is a spin-off book about a girl that we met in the cat and mouse duet. I will say though, this series is very dark and contains very disturbing topics, so of course, as always, check content warnings. But this as a book on its own, I honestly did not like it. I was more disappointed because I was waiting to learn more about this character and I was upset with what we got. I think there was a romance just thrown in to make it spicy. We didn't need it. And the only thing I really loved about it was the epilogue, so I'm excited to read other books she's coming out in the series. This one just missed the mark for me.
Next is The Reunion by Kayla Olson. This was such a fun plot. Our two characters ended up reuniting for a reunion episode of their hit TV show when they were kids. I liked the whole idea of them being back on set, and there's some parts where we could like read the script, so I think that was all fun. I think the romance just lacked a little something for me though. There was years where these characters went on without telling each other how they felt, and that always makes me so sad, but it was still a really fun read and I do recommend this book.
Next book I have is King of Battle and Blood by Scarlett St. Clair. This was my first book by this author. I feel like I should have started with something else. This was a romantasy book and there was an arranged marriage. That intrigued me. But overall, this book just does not stick out to me at all. This was one of those times where as I was reading, it was reminding me of a bunch of other books. But I guess I thought it was okay because I gave it 3 stars. So solid read. Would I say it's worth it? I would say no because it's not memorable.
The next one is Weather Girl by Rachel Lynn Solman. This one is so cute. So we're following 2 people and our girl is a meteorologist and the guy is a sports reporter, and they're falling in love, and they're also trying to parent trap their bosses because their bosses were married and in love and then they fell apart, and so they're trying to get them back together. So it's just a fun time overall. I do recommend if you're looking for a fast-paced rom-com.
The next book we both read was another book club book, and it was Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies by Heather Fawcett. This was a fantasy world, and I do remember loving the setting, the descriptions, the storytelling, and learning about fairies. So how can I love all of that and not be intrigued by the plot? I don't know what happens, but maybe it is something we have against cozy fantasy. I don't know.
The writing is so beautiful, but I need it to not be.
I don't even mind beautiful writing, but something needs to be happening. Something needs to be happening that I'm hooked into. No, it's worth the read if you do like this whimsical type of cozy, lower stakes fantasy.
If you like Divine Rivals and Legend Lattes, there you go. Up next is The Fury by Alex Michaelides. This is the author of The Silent Patient, which I absolutely loved. This was a really interesting mystery thriller as well because our main character was basically telling us the story as if we're old friends catching up, and I really did like that take for a mystery thriller. And it's one of those where all of these friends are invited to this private island and a murder ends up happening and you have to figure out what happened. I did not see the plot twist coming, so I definitely did like this story, but I do think The Silent Patient remains my favorite book from this author.
This year I knew I wanted to revisit some of the classics I read in high school, so I first read Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. We all know what this one's about. It's a classic for a reason. I had a fun time rereading this. I honestly don't think I retained anything the first time I read it, so it was interesting going back into this story, but I think this was a good start on my classics journey.
Next is Bride by Ali Hazelwood. This was one of my most anticipated reads for 2024, and it did not miss. I never read Twilight, so it was interesting to see how this world deals with werewolves and vampires together, and I wasn't expecting this mystery that was happening throughout the whole book, but I do think that added to the plot as well. I had a really good time with this one, and I liked that Ali Hazelwood left it open for potentially having a second book. Highly recommend.
Up next, I have All's Well by Mona Awad. In this book, we have a former theater actress who now lives in excruciating pain, and she becomes dependent on painkillers. Like I said earlier, Mona Awad just knows how to write a really bizarre, crazy story. There's always so many different layers though. There's so many hidden meanings and metaphors. I love her writing. I will say though, I liked Rouge better than I liked this one. This one was still super fun though. I honestly recommend her books to anyone who likes weird things.
Next I have Apples Never Fall by Leanne Morardi. I thought I was gonna love this one, but I really did not. I think it felt really repetitive. The big twist that happened in the end was not acceptable. Like, I was not happy with the big twist in the end because it wasn't a twist at all. And I wanted to read this one because I knew that adaptation was coming out, and I did watch the adaptation, and I do think I liked the adaptation more than the book. book. I recommend just watching the adaptation though.
Up next, I read Suicide Notes from Beautiful Girls by Lynn Wingarden. In this book, we have a high school student who investigates her ex-best friend's suicide. Such an underrated YA mystery. I loved this book. I know when I read some of the reviews, people did not like the ending. I thought the ending was perfect. I loved it. I'd say worth the read if you like YA mystery thrillers. After reading this book, I knew I had to read other books by this author.
Next is Float by Kate Marchant. This was my first Wattpad read and I actually really loved it. I loved all of the characters in this book and I could easily picture everything that was happening. It was such a perfect light YA read with a romance, family drama, and a found family. I do think the ending was a little bit rushed, but I still enjoyed it and I think everyone should read this book in the summertime.
After that, I read Just Another Missing Person by Gillian McAllister. This is my second Gillian McAllister book and I loved it just as much as I loved the first one. In this one, a detective is blackmailed into framing someone for the murder that she's investigating. I thought this one was so juicy. There were so many creepy things happening and I actually really liked the way that everything turned out. I just love the story from start to finish, so I can't wait to read more by Gillian McAllister. I do think it's worth the read.
Next I have Flawless by Elsie Silver. This one was so cute. This was my first cowboy romance and I am totally in my cowboy era right now. The romance was so cute and there was so much family drama that I just loved in this book and I really liked getting to know all of the Eaton brothers, so I'm excited to continue on with this series. Definitely recommend.
This year I finally read If We Were Villains by ML Rio and I cannot believe it took me this long to read it. This is a murder mystery that takes place at an elite college and we follow 7 different students. Honestly, it just had such amazing vibes throughout. I don't know if this is considered dark academia, but if this is what it is, I love it. I was just all wrapped up in the story and the ending had me crying, so definitely worth the read and worth the hype.
Next I have You Reach Sam. This one was really sad because her boyfriend ends up passing away. I didn't realize that was like a whole trope of books. I've read a few like that and I don't like them. They make me so sad.
I don't want to read any like that.
Yeah, I think I need to calm down with books like that because every time I read them, I just like don't want to be reading them.
The next book I read was another classic and it was The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. Honestly, during this reread, I was just picturing the cast of the movie adaptation because that's all I could think of now. I did really enjoy this book, but again, my issue when it comes to classics is I know things are going over my head because of the way that the writing is different. I'm sure there's a lot of like hidden meanings and messages and metaphors that I just wasn't picking up on. That's why I need to read more classics. I think I'm gonna have to revisit it once I'm more intelligent.
The next one I read is The Only One Left by Riley Sager. This is my new favorite Riley Sager book. So freaking good. This was so fantastic. It had me hooked from page 1. I did not want to put this book down and the twist kept on twisting. There was just plot twist after plot twist and I wasn't expecting that. I absolutely loved it. I've loved every single Riley Sager book that I've read, but I find with his other books it's kind of like normal mystery thrillers where it's a little slow and then it picks up towards the end, but this one was crazy the entire way through. Definitely recommend this mystery thriller if you have not read it yet.
Last little short book I have is The Ocean at the End of the Lane by Neil Gaiman. Bailey gave me this book, thank you. But this was a really unexpected story. I did not think it was going to be as creepy and as whimsical as it was. Overall though, this was super fun. A lot of the characters were chilling and I should have known because he wrote Coraline. I really enjoyed the descriptions though. It was a very good read.
Next we both read Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez. Another excellent book by Abby Jimenez. She is one of my most favorite romance authors. Our 2 main characters had such great chemistry and I was not expecting all of the family drama, but I really think it added to the whole plot and I think this was a really fun book club read. I ended up giving this one a 4.75, which means it should have been a 5. I'm changing it to a 5.
This year I did finish off the Hades series. This is a reverse harem dark romance by Tate James. And I think Tate James is the queen of reverse harem stories. This was just such a fun series. It is dark, there's rival gangs, there's a mystery, it is super spicy, and I fall in love with all of the love interests. Overall, I absolutely love this series. I would give this like a 4-star. Definitely worth the read, but I would read the Madison Kate series first because this is basically the spin-off series.
Up next is Forever Interrupted by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I think this is my least favorite Taylor Jenkins Reid book that I've read so far, but only because it had that same plot where the girl's boyfriend ended up passing away, and those are just, they're too emotionally draining for me. The story was good overall, but I gotta stop picking up books like that because it's just too much.
I read another twisty YA mystery thriller, and it was Bad Girls with Perfect Faces by Lynn Wingarden again. I will say I liked Suicide Notes better, but this one was still really fun. This is an author that really has me glued to the page from start to finish, but I was able to predict the ending, so that's the only reason I didn't love this one a little bit more.
Next is The Love Wager by Lynn Painter. This was my first Lynn Painter read. Fake dating is one of my favorite tropes, so I'm so glad it was in this one. I know I would have loved this even more if there wasn't insta-lust and miscommunication, but I still had a really fun time reading this one. So I'm excited to read more from this author, and thank you again, Liz, for gifting this book to me.
Up next, I read my first Sally Hepworth book, Darling Girls. This started my love for this author. In this one, we have 3 foster sisters who are brought back to the house they grew up in, and they have to face secrets from their past. I thought this one was so gripping. At no point did I know where the story was going. I just really had a good time with it. And now I'm determined to read as many Sally Hepworth books that I could find. Worth the read, definitely.
Next is A Fate Inked in Blood by Danielle L. Jensen. This was my first Danielle L. Jensen book, and I really did like her writing. The first half of the story I was super connected with, and then I don't know what happened. I was just kind of ready for it to wrap up. I kept feeling like I wish we got to know more about our guy love interest. Things just felt like they were moving a little bit too fast for me, and I'm sure we're going to get to know a lot more about him in the second book, but I don't know if I want to stick around to find out.
Next, I had a flop for me this year, and it was Very Bad People by Kit Frick. I read this book because I loved I Killed Zoe Spanos last year. This one completely missed the mark for me. It was a YA mystery, and I was intrigued because I knew it had something to do with like a secret society on campus, but this one just didn't impress me. I was very disappointed with it, but I do want to read other books by Kit Frick because I know I already have some by her, but I didn't love this one. I don't think it's worth the read.
Up next, I have another 5-star read, and it is Lady Tan's Circle of Women by Lisa C., and this was absolutely fantastic. I'm such a historical fiction girly. There's just something about historical fiction that is just more meaningful. In this one, we were learning about how Chinese women were treated in the early 1500s, and that was insane. I loved that Lady Tan was able to push beyond traditions that were holding her back so that she could help other women. The impact on this book is just, it's so good. I can go on and on about it, but definitely recommend if you want to get into historical fiction. This one was fantastic.
Up next, I have Check and Mate by Ali Hazelwood. This one was like a YA romance. There's chess involved. I really enjoyed it. It was super entertaining. I kind of wish that there was more books about this couple. I'm super happy that I ended up liking it because it is very different from her STEM romances that she does.
Next, I read The Friend Zone by Abby Jimenez. I don't know why I hadn't read this book yet, but it was another really good one. I always mention how I do like that Abby Jimenez always has deeper things going on in her romance books, and this one put me through a roller coaster of emotions. I was not prepared for the heartache that this one brought, but I will forever recommend every single Abby Jimenez book.
Up next, I have Call Me By Your Name by Andre Ossiman, and this book absolutely destroyed me. I was not prepared for it to be a sad book. The story is about a sudden, powerful romance that blooms between these 2 boys over the summer. It had just really beautiful, devastating writing. It's definitely not a feel-good book, but it is unforgettable. I need to watch the movie adaptation. I think the book is definitely worth the read.
Next, I have Wrong Place, Wrong Time by Gillian McAllister, and this one was so good. I loved the idea of being able to go back in time to try and stop a crime. I was able to read this one in a full day because I was just so locked in and had to know what was going to happen. I really loved that the twists and turns were spread out through the entire story. Everything was just perfect. It was quite the journey, and I will be reading more from this author.
I ended up binge reading this little dark romance series. I believe this was the Vicious Lost Boy series by Nikki St. Crow. And this was like a dark, roughly inspired Peter Pan and Lost Boys story. I say roughly inspired because it's really not having anything to do with that. It was very spicy though because it was reverse harem. I love anything to do with Peter Pan, so I had a good time with these. Here's the thing. I enjoyed these enough to read them all in one sitting and buy physical copies of them, but I really retained nothing. I don't remember the story, I don't remember the characters, but I do remember having a good time while reading it, so do with that what you will.
Next, I have What Moves the Dead by T. Kingfisher. This was actually my first read from this author, and I really liked it. This was my first gothic horror story that I've ever read. It's kind of outside of my comfort zone, but I'm glad I gave this a chance. I do think the ending was rushed, but it is a very small book, so that's understandable, and I do want to read more from this author, so I do recommend.
Up next, I read Being Lolita by Allison Wood, and this was a memoir about this author's experience being taken advantage of as a high school student by her high school teacher. It, of course, was sad and heartbreaking. I do think it was written really beautifully, and I like the ending and how she kind of finds a positive in things that happen, and she's trying to teach girls her age things she wished she was taught when she was younger. But this is a story I'm definitely going to be thinking about for a long time, so worth the read.
Next is The Paradise Problem by Christina Lauren. I love Christina Lauren. They can do no go wrong. This was a perfect summer romance. I think our characters had such great banter. Family drama and fake dating are two of my favorite tropes, and they were done very well in this book. I also loved all of the descriptions of the private islands that they were on. I felt like I was on vacation with them, so definitely recommend for a summer read.
Next book I have is Sunkissed by Casey West. This was a short YA contemporary, and I think it read a little young for me. If I was younger, I think I would have related to a lot of things happening more, and that would have made me love it. I still think it was a solid summer read, but it was very YA.
Next I have The Hunting Wives by May Cobb. I don't know why I was so worried I wasn't going to like this one, but I was so entertained the entire way through. It was very much like Desperate Housewives, but even more drama, if you can imagine that. I was entertained the entire way through, and I was just ready to figure out what was going to happen. The writing style kind of reminded me of Ellen Hilderbrand, but it was a highly entertaining read that had me guessing until the very end, so definitely recommend this book.
Up next, I have the Book of Cold Cases by Simone St. James. This was a paranormal mystery. It was a little bit slow, but it had its spooky moments. Overall, this book didn't really capture me. I found it more sad than scary. So this one I don't think was my favorite, but I really love The Sundown Motel by this author, so I want to read more books by her.
Next I have The Last Word by Taylor Adams. I read No Exit by this author and I didn't like that one, so I was hoping I was going to like this one more, but I also did not like this one. I wanted to DNF it, but I just kind of pushed through in hopes that things would pick up, and I never really felt like they did. I also thought the twist wasn't that shocking, so I don't know. I don't think Taylor Adams is for me, but that's okay. I'm so glad that so many other people really like their writing.
Up next, we both read The Reappearance of Rachel Price by Holly Jackson. I think this was one of my favorite book club books that we had. Such a good mystery. There were so many twists and turns. I loved the characters, I loved the story, I loved the ending. This was my favorite Holly Jackson book thus far, and I think this one could use a little more hype, if anything.
I want to see this one as an adaptation.
This would be a very good adaptation.
I ran out of space on my cart, so now I'm just going to move on to the stack that I have here, but the next one I have is The Wishing Game by Meg Schaffer. I had heard a lot of amazing things about this book, but I honestly didn't find myself loving it too much. I think I was expecting just a little bit more from this story, especially with all of the hype around it, but I did think it was cute. It did remind me of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. I think it was a solid read. I was just expecting a little bit more.
Up next, I have Archer's Voice by Mia Sheridan. I know this book was popular years ago. It took me years to read it, but now I understand the hype. I thought it was so good. I did read it in one sitting, so it definitely has that pull that brought me in. The only thing is, I feel like towards the end it got a little too crazy dramatic for me, and that's the only reason I didn't give it higher stars. But overall, I really enjoyed it and I liked the characters. I am interested in reading more Mia Sheridan now. She's been putting out a lot of new books, but overall I do think it's worth the read. It was very entertaining.
The next one I have is Dark Matter by Blake Crouch. This was such a good science fiction mixed with mystery thriller. I could easily imagine everything that was going on, and I never knew where the story was going to go, so I really loved it for that. I also did watch the adaptation and I really liked that as well, so highly recommend both.
Up next, we both read Funny Story by Emily Henry, and we actually both really loved this one. This book is kind of a funny story. The trope is my ex's ex's ex. So if you like something like that, definitely give this one a read. Her books always have so much depth to them. I know that I always like that the relationships are super realistic, but we had so much fun with this, especially reading with the book club. 10 out of 10 do recommend.
Next I have Secretly Yours and Unfortunately Yours by Tessa Bailey, and unfortunately I did not like this series. I don't know what it was. I don't remember these characters. I don't know. I was expecting more because I've loved a lot of the Tessa Bailey books that I've read, but these were just not my favorite. Really cute covers though.
Up next, I have Death in Her Hands by Otessa Moshfegh. This was a blind book for me one month, and I think my least favorite book by this author. I think the writing style, even though it makes sense for the plot, was just too messy for me to follow. I was losing interest while I was reading. The ending did catch me off guard, but I like her other books better than I liked this one. I'd say not worth the read.
Next I have Shipwrecked by Olivia Dade, and I did end up DNFing this. So I really did try though. I stick around for a long time when there's books that I know I want to DNF. So I give it a fair chance, but I couldn't put myself through it anymore, so I don't recommend. But I love if you loved this book.
Up next, we both read One Italian Summer by Rebecca Serrell, and this one we loved. This was such a sad, wonderful story. It wrecked me. I did not see anything that was happening coming. I was crying by the end of it. And Lauren Graham is the narrator of this audiobook, so having her read it to you is just like even more emotional.
Here's one that I like. I have Annie Bots by Sierra Greer. I ended up giving this one a 4.5 stars. This was a crazy story. Annie was created by her boyfriend to be the perfect girlfriend, and I do wish the story was longer because it did feel a little bit rushed and I wanted like a crazier ending, but it is a short read, so it is understandable, but highly recommend. This one was insane.
Up next, I have Ghosts by Dolly Alderton. This was my second Dolly Alderton book and I loved it. I think she does a really good job of writing like she's just your friend and she's telling you about her life. It's very relatable, it's very funny. There's some really great quotes and life lessons, so I do think it's worth a read and I do want to read more by her.
Next, I have The 5-Star Weekend by Ellen Hilderbrand. I love traveling to Nantucket every summer through Ellen Hilderbrand books. I love that her books are just always full of drama. This one was also very good, but I think The Hotel Nantucket is my favorite from these two.
Up next, I have Malibu Rising by Taylor Jenkins Reid, my first book by this author. I like that the story takes place in the span of one day. We're following this family and we learn the way they grew up and affected the way that they've lived their lives since then. I like it for what it was. I see why not everyone wanted me to read it as my first book by this author, but I thought it was solid. It kind of reminded me of Shameless without all the crazy stuff that happens.
The next one I have is Alex Approximately by Jen Bennett. I think this one, I feel the same way that you felt about Sunkissed. It was just a little bit too YA for me. I know I would have loved it if I read it when I was younger, but I don't know, there was just a little disconnect. It felt a little silly to be reading it. Definitely a cute story for YA readers though.
I read books 7 and 8 in the Zodiac Academy series by Caroline Peckham and Suzanne Valenti. You guys know I've been working my way through this series for a long time now. Book 7, actually I was super scared because this made me question whether or not I wanted to finish reading the series. I think things were just way too drawn out. By the time that the crazy ending happened, like I didn't care anymore. But everyone told me to keep reading and I'm glad I did because book 8 really brought me back. Now that I was expecting the story to be drawn out, I enjoyed this one a lot more. I still think we got POVs that weren't necessary, but this is a really fun series. The way that it starts out and the way that it ends is very different. It kind of starts off like a bully romance and it morphs into this epic fantasy type of thing. So I do think this series is worth a read. You gotta put the work in though, because these are always super long, and like I said, like towards book 7 I felt like I was over it, but it's worth it.
The next one I have is Not in Love by Ali Hazelwood, and I am not in love with this book by Ali Hazelwood, and that's sad because I love this author, but this one I just could not connect with. I just didn't feel a connection with these two characters, and the main guy was reminding me of Joe from You, and maybe that's because I was listening to the audiobook while reading this story. He just sounded like him, so I don't know if that's what threw me off or if it was the writing itself, but I could not get down with this one, so I don't recommend this one. But every other Ali Hazelwood book, yes.
Up next we have Our Crooked Hearts by Melissa Albert. Loved this book. So surprised because I wasn't expecting to love it as much as I did. It's a spooky, witchy book, perfect for October. Kind of wish I would have saved it for then, but I had such a good time reading it. Absolutely crazy. Did not end the way I thought it would. Definitely worth the read.
The next one I have is Dial A for Aunties by Jessie Q. Sutanto. I love that this author writes such cozy mystery thrillers. I did read Vera Wong by this author as well, and I absolutely loved that one. I think it's one of those things where you just like whatever was the first book that you read from this author. Vera Wong was my favorite, but this one was really cute too, so I definitely recommend this author.
I ended up reading another Sally Hepworth book. This was The Soulmate, and I loved it just as much, if not more, than Darling Girls. In this, we're following multiple couples. There's hella secrets and drama unfolding. We're basically just trying to piece together what happened. We get really interesting point of views, and I just love this book. This one has me excited to read the rest of her work. I'd say it's worth the read.
The next one I have is The Only Survivors by Megan Miranda. But this was not my favorite mystery thriller that I've read. I am interested in reading something else from Megan Miranda.
My Megan Miranda book went a little bit better than Amanda's last month. This was The Last House Guest. And while I agree it's not my favorite mystery thriller of the year, I still did enjoy it. It's one of those stories where a girl ends up dead and her best friend's determined to uncover what actually happened. I think this plot can be done really well, but I've just read other books with this plot that I've preferred.
The next one I have is Daughter of the Pirate King by Trisha Levenseller. This one was so cute. It was definitely such a fast-paced read, and I feel like by the time we got to the end of the book is when I was finally starting to get super invested, so I will be reading that second book soon.
The next one is Home is Where the Bodies Are by Geneva Rose. This was our most recent book club book. It was a mystery thriller. The reason why I didn't love it was because I I had read a book super similar to what happened, so I was able to predict the ending early on. But other than that, I mean, I think it was a solid read.
I was expecting something crazier for the plot twist. The cover is amazing.
We do want to own the physical copy because the cover is cute.
Next I have This Summer Will Be Different by Carly Fortune. I was a little worried about this one because I did not like Meet Me at the Lake by this author, but I definitely liked this one a lot more. This one was best friend's brother romance, and those are always a good time. So I do recommend this for a summer rom-com.
Up next, I have Vengeance of the Pirate Queen by Trisha Levenseller. This is a spin-off off of the original duet, which I loved. And this one was so good, I kind of wish that it was its own duet. We had a new adventure, a new crew to follow. This one was just as action-packed and adventurous as the first ones. I love pirate-themed books.
Next I have The Perfect Couple by Ellen Hilderbrand. I wanted to read this one because Netflix did just release the trailer for the movie adaptation for this book, and it looked crazy. Nicole Kidman is playing the main girlie. I think I gave it like a 4.5 stars, and I'm so ready to watch that adaptation.
Last book I have for this video is Wicked Beauty by Katie Roberts. This is the third book in the Dark Olympus series. I did not like book 1, I loved book 2, and this one I think was my favorite so far. This world is basically a modern day Olympus. I love that. This one included a trials type of deal. We had multiple love interests. I loved them all, and I thought it was really fun. I cannot wait to continue on with this series. I'm glad I decided to continue reading after the first book.
The last one I have is Blackout, and this was created by a bunch of POC authors, and I absolutely loved the idea of this book. We're basically following a bunch of different teenagers during a blackout that happened in New York City. I did enjoy some author stories more than others, but I do think this is such a cool concept, and I will be reading Whiteout by these authors as well later in the winter.
Okay guys, that was every single book that we've read so far this year. This video took 4 hours. But honestly, it was so fun to look back and see everything that we've read. I'm glad that we did this halfway in the year. I couldn't imagine at the end of the year having to do every book we've read. So we'll just have a part 2 later on in the year to show you guys what we read past this point. I'm proud of us though.
Me too.
This is crazy.
This is a lot of books right here. I need to really focus on trying to read books that I know I'm going to like. I need to be reading some 4 or 5 stars. Help me out with that. Let me know some book recommendations if you have any.
That's pretty much it for today's video though. Reminder to join our Literal Besties book club if you haven't already. This month we are reading Assistant to the Villain. We will leave that link in the description along with that magic mind link. But that's gonna be all for today. Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe if you haven't already, and we will see you guys next time.
You guys, we've done this video twice actually, and now these guys are cutting the grass, you know, that's fine, but
I lost my anxiety med. Where is it? Today's done.
You know what?
What?
This felt like Divine Rivals for me.
Did. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
I don't know what about it then. Maybe we don't like cozy fantasy books.
Maybe, because we didn't like Legends of Lattes either.
We need high stakes.
Yeah.
Someone needs to be shooting up this place. Someone needs to be dying.
You're right,
there needs to be war.
Yeah. This was cute though, like very
into. And I guess that's the problem. That was not me, I promise.
Okay.
Did anyone hear that? Have you seen that little girl?
No.
I think there's a ghost in here.
Oh, yeah.
I know that they have an adaptation for this, and I can't picture that, so I definitely am gonna have to give that a watch.
We watched it at your house.
I don't remember that.
One of my most anticipated reads for 2024, and it did not miss.
And it did not miss. No, I love it. We should do one year where like we don't round, like we just give whole stars.
We should do that from now on.
No, I
It
can't.
is what it is.
We should change the title to us not liking the books we read this year.